everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning, or good afternoon rather. Thank you so much for that wonderful set, Andrea.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining us here today for an afternoon with Dorothy. And we're super happy y'all are all here. While you're at Malvern, please feel free to take advantage of our 2 holiday specials we have going on. We have a holiday gift card special as well as a 12 Days of Christmas sale. And we can tell you all more about that. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our featured reader. Dorothy Ellis Barnett landed in Austin after a hardscrabble childhood growing up on the riverbeds, campgrounds, and roads of the Southwest. While at the University of Texas, she obtained a BA in Anthropology and an M.A. in English and was awarded a James A. Michener Fellowship. With the other fellows, she founded Borderlands Texas Poetry Review, then went on to launch the Rio Review and Poetry at Round Top. Dorothy subsequently earned her M.F.A. from Pacific Lutheran University. She is now Professor Emerita at Austin Community College, where she founded the Creative Writing Department. She's a former board member of the Writers League of Texas and is on the organizational committee for Poetry at Round Top, held at Festival Hill each spring. Please welcome Dorothy.
Thank you all for coming here, and I don't know if I need this or not. Maybe I can you hear me in the back if I don't use it? Yeah? Okay, we'll see. The introduction was written by Terry Sherrill over there, and I've been connected to Terry for many years through writing and the various journals that we've worked on. I feel like I'm reading to a group of friends. I know you all, and I've known you all, some of you for years and years and years, and I really appreciate your being here and maybe helping calm my nerves a little bit. I write poetry, memoir, and short stories, and I've written in other genres too. And the 3 books that I'm going to read little excerpts from today are in that. And I'd like to read them in order of poetry, memoirs, pieces, and short stories. And the reason for that, I'd like to tell you in just a second here. In the introduction or the foreword to Bligh's Dust, I say that Joyce Carol Oates once said that any poem can become a short story and any short story can become a novel. And so I've always tried to read and write across many genres because I didn't want to be labeled. And labeling is one of the things that I fought hard against all my life. Is who am I and what am I, and don't put me in a box. And I've known so many people who write only poetry, and instead of saying, oh, I'm a poet, they could say I'm a writer and I write everything. So, so I'm going to start with a few poems, and then I'll go into some of the memoir. You'll have to excuse my voice, and I think it's going. I don't know where, but it is. Okay, this is a poem titled Where You're From. If you live long enough in one place, you'll learn the lay of the land. How far it is to the Henley cutoff, that the best pie for miles can be bought at the bowling alley in Blanco. Know the woman called Grace who stood in her front yard and watched as her only daughter was killed crossing the highway. Remember the red everywhere. Remember, you'll know that the pinpoints of light in the dark hills across the valley belong to the Miller place. Know where your friend Marla, who isn't here today, know where your friend Marla wanted to live one summer several boyfriends ago. Know the trickle of the Comel, the Blanco, the Pedernales, the Guadalupe. Wet mantras that measure how far you've been. You'll know which stars guide you home. I'd like to write about landscape. I like to feel that I'm part of nature, nature's part of me, even if I don't get out in it a lot. I really do feel like it's all connected. I also write about family. The next poem is about my mother. It's called Red. The woman in the red dress looks in the mirror and thinks about the color red wonders when it became a bad color, thinks about scarlet in Hester's letter, thinks about blood red, wonders why monthly bleeding is a curse, thinks about red light districts, wonders about berries, pyracantha and andina, holly and yaupon, wonders about the colors crimson, carmine, cerise, thinks about the red cracks on the marjan tiles, written prayers on red paper left twisting in the wind, remembers cardinals flying red through the wintering trees. The woman wearing the color red wonders about her Aunt Ruby. She looks in the mirror and remembers red was her mother's favorite color. Remembers her red lipstick stains on wine glasses. Remembers not wearing red for 30 years. I had breast cancer, and I not only survived it, I kicked its butt. It's been years. And it's going to stay that way. It's going to stay gone, okay? But there's a moment when you hear something like you have cancer that everything changes. The palette changes, the way you see the sky, your family, everything changes. And so I have two poems here about that I'd like to read. One is called Threads, because threads are, you pull on a piece of thread. Water seeks lower ground when dirt gives way. Cells reach out to other cells, come together, then pull apart. Something appears where there was nothing. Pockets are turned inside out, lives upside down. What has to be is so quickly forgotten. The sun sets and there is an empty moon. Even dreams hold dark silence, and there is only one set of footprints leading away. How quickly we unravel. And the next one came after I got a scan on my brain, and there's something that the doctors put on the little explanation, the reading of the x-rays, and it says, if there's nothing's wrong, your brain is unremarkable. So the title of this is, This Brain is Unremarkable. MRI lab report. The unremarkable brain lives in a world of words, where clean white margins surround student writing. Clean margins surround the lump in the breast of the body housing the unremarkable brain. Sewing machine sounds on vague breast of the body, but the unremarkable brain does not think about the sounds. It thinks of cells, red, white, and others that are faster moving. The word lump changes the meaning of sweetness, hair, as the unremarkable brain wonders about the female erotic, wonders how much has really changed. Rejecting the words recurring and spreading, the unremarkable brain does not think about the future, the past, thinks instead about a woman in Germany who injects mistletoe joists each day. The unremarkable brain does not like the word survive, prefers conquer, prefers living in a land where bridges are blown up and armies do not advance across borders, and wonder if Rachel Carson felt alone in her silence, wonders if her garden was slashed, poisoned, and burned. The unremarkable brain wakes in the full moon stillness of 2 a.m., knows more than it wants to know, watches as the word promise floats in the air. The unremarkable brain grabs it and holds on. This next one is the title poem. This is the title of the book is Bligh's Dust, and it comes Robert Bly is a famous poet. If you know him, fine. If you don't, look him up. He's a great poet. And he wrote a poem, and I'll just read the last stanza of the poem that he wrote because it's called A Poem in 3 Parts. And so the last part, it's his morning poems. It's how he wakes up and feels when he wakes up in the morning. And he says, The strong leaves of the box elder tree plunging in the wind call us to disappear into the wilds of the universe, where we shall sit at the foot of a plant and live forever like the dust. So this is Bligh's Dust for Robert Blount. The early morning sun sinks down to fill my spirit well. My thoughts come close, recede like snow drifts against the house. Through the window, the old hackberry's bud shells curl around new yellow, green potential that will brood at the foot of plants. I have slept the night. I will be like that to last forever. Okay, now in road songs, so poems, I see poems as little slides or little distilled images of life, you know. And so all of those are intimate poems about me at times of my life. And I think that of poetry that way, if you're really engaged in writing poetry. Road songs, it's a memoir. It's about my life as a child, and it also is intimate. Poetry, you can fudge a little and use poetic license. Give the poem to somebody else, another speaker. Go to an imaginary place. In memoir, you try to tell the truth. And in this memoir, I tried to tell the truth that I knew and I remembered at the time. And we all know how memory works, right? And what I'm going to do is, there's a couple of sections in here, I'll just read a little part of it, and it kind of gives you a broader feel for the whole book, or the book itself. And so this is from Road Songs. And my family drank. My mother and my father drank. I was adopted. We traveled all over. I didn't go to school for probably 4 years, 3 or 4 years when I was elementary school age. It was a hard life because they fought. We were homeless. There was all sorts of things going on. And so I've tried to get that feel. And the first little piece I'm going to read to you is called Secrets. Laura's my mother's name. Okay. Laura loved country western dancing, slow shuffling circles around the straw dust covered floor, a few drinks, and she would dance for hours while I slept on folding chairs or stretched out in a booth waiting, always waiting. We kept our family dance going in much the same way, slow circles around the truth of the important things, the drinking, fighting, and of course, money never held any reality for us. How much we kept secret from the relatives who did not really know us will never be known. So much has been lost to memory. It was the drinking that covered everything, and whiskey, their liquid god. This much is truth. They could stay drunk for weeks, and then just as suddenly as it started, it would end. Around the family, Kenneth and Laura became dry drunks, who sometimes didn't drink for months. Then during one of their fights, the car or truck would pull into the parking lot of a liquor store, and he would rush in. Brown paper bags concealed the slender whiskey bottles he brought out to Laura. But the minute the black metal top was screwed off, the familiar smell filled the car as they passed the bottle back and forth until it was empty. At times I was remembered, and he would bring me a soft drink, an RC, a Coke, orange, or strawberry pop. With the windows rolled down and country music blaring on the radio, they seemed complete, the fight forgotten. As they were pulled down into their dreams, I escaped into mine. All they could see was the side of the road. That was their dream for that moment, nothing else. I saw the dream within their dream. My dream was not afraid or alone. Sometimes only half the scene escapes. And, excuse me, for me, that's the way memoir works and the way the memory works for when I write, is just snippets. And I try to fill those in. And connecting in some way. I had a dean when I taught at ACC who we fought a lot. And in case those of you that know me know how stubborn I am and opinionated I am, and so was she. And so I was there first, and she and I fought a lot, you know. So she told me one day, she said, "You don't seem to be afraid of anything." And I told her, I said, "Oh, yes, I am. I'm afraid of everything." So this piece is called The Blimp. Kind of one of those odd pieces that it's a memory that's a half memory that I keep pulling at and that I remember it. It's very visceral. I am hiding under my father's truck, the huge red one with the wooden sides that he takes to the San Joaquin Valley Basin for cantaloupes, or over the eastern hills into Riverside for watermelons. My hands hurt where the gravel has embedded, and I can smell the oily gasoline, hear the breathing sound of the big silver thing in the sky, hear it over the screens as it hovers over me. The noise comes first, then the shadow, then the silvery shape filling the hazy midday sky. My eyes close tight, and they're screaming over and over. I want someone to come. Touching. It is my father. He is under the truck with me and tries to drag me out. I hold to something greasy and the screaming becomes louder. His voice says, "Stop it. Stop that now." The scream continues. Two wooden houses sit in the open space bordered by a U-shaped building. A factory of tall rusted metal walls that block the sun most of the day surrounds the opening on three sides. An alley turns the length of the fourth side, not a street or a road, just a dirt alley. White picket fencing separates two houses from each other, just a dirt alley. The houses and the factory are close to a flat, grassy field where the Goodyear blimp sits tethered. This is my earliest landscape memory. It's really pre-verbal. I don't remember talking at that time. It just... Later, my father drives me in the red truck to the grassy field. We watch the blimp take off and land from the protection of the cab. He talks to me over and over about the blimp as I sit on his lap, clutching his hand. "Don't be afraid of things. There ain't nothing to be afraid of," he said. When I go outside, the boy who lives in the other house doesn't talk to me. He comes to the fence and throws sand that hurts my eyes, and I cry. My mother washes the sand out with cold water. She goes next door to yell at the other mother. I stand inside and watch through the screen door. The next day, the boy throws sand in my face. He is always outside. My father yells at the other mother. I watch my father wrap black tape around the end of the long silver antenna he has taken off the car we ride into the store. His hands smooth the tape as he talks to me. "I won't be around to protect you forever. You have to take up for yourself." My pudgy hand wraps around the taped end and we practice hitting things. First the chair. "Harder," he says. Then the table. "Like that," he says. Outside, the boy waits for me. I know this. I am afraid. My father watches from the window as I walk over to the fence, reach through the open space, and hit him. Hard. Again. Harder, like the table. His eyes open wide and hurt. His mouth opens wide as he cries. He does not throw sand anymore. Many years later, a co-worker says to me, "You don't seem to be afraid of much." I am. Yes, I am, I think. But my father watches from the window. This next one is kind of follows in shape and form. A pistache is just a mixed mash of memories. And it is also gives you a little kind of look into some of the things that happened. And I use a deck of cards. This is just part of a larger piece, so I'm just reading a smaller section from it. If I threw a deck of cards into the air and watched them twist and turn in the light as they slow motion somersault to the ground, I can say my memories of these years are like the fleeting images on the falling cards. My cousin Robert gave me a black eye. I started school in Gardena. We rode in an airplane to Houston after selling everything we owned. I slept curled up in the back seat of cars and honky-tonk parking lots as Hank Williams sang in the darkness. We came back to LA in 3 weeks broke. I walked to school through an open field of wild yellow mustard plants and gray green anise. Mrs. Drysdale was my first grade teacher. She held me on her lap and brushed my hair during recess. The teachers wanted to skip me a grade but didn't make me when I cried. My mother started leaving. My first grade love was Dennis Muncy. My first two-wheel bike was a Red Ryder with a BB gun and a leather scabbard hanging down the side. There were wonderful yellow pears in my lunchbox and clear glass bottles of white whole milk with stoppers that tasted waxy when lit. The smell of the pears filled the room when I lifted the metal lid. I went to a birthday party for a friend whose grandmother and mother worked in the kitchen of the airport. My father had an ulcer and drank endless glasses of buttermilk mixed with white bread. The Pacific Ocean was cold. My father taught me how to play dominoes. Dean Martin sang That's Amore in the car. Eucalyptus trees swayed their scent. I sang a solo, A Silent Night at the school Christmas program in first grade. The whole school lined up in the playground for smallpox shots. The kindergarten teacher had a box of silk scarves. We danced around the room pretending we were butterflies with jewel-toned silk wings floating behind us. We danced to the Los Angeles City Symphony Orchestra, piped into the classroom, Mozart, Beethoven, and Puccini. We went to the downtown city library. I fell in love with books. I don't remember learning how to read. The last card tumbles to the ground and a defining moment happens. My parents fall in love with drinking. My father becomes a professional gambler. We sell everything again. We buy a small travel trailer and hit the road. I leave traditional education in the second grade and don't return until I'm 11. So now we come to fiction. This is Christmas. I'm going to read you a Christmas story. And I think it was Richard Ford who said at the beginning of one of his stories, this is not a happy story, I warn you. So I'm going to warn you, it's not I don't think it's an unhappy story, but some people do. But some people think, oh, my work's unhappy, so there you go. You know? You take what you can get. This is called Christmas Lights. I must have been 10 or so when the De La Rosas moved into our marginal neighborhood in Fort Worth. As my mother often said, we were living right on the fringe between dirt poor and paying the rent each week. Even at that, our neighborhood was a step up for them, the De La Rosas. They rented the yellow house across Belknap Street that had been vacant ever since my friend Betty's family moved to California. It was late summer and school was this looming threat that grew bigger every day, and I was bored. I remember wandering over when their old black Chevy truck pulled into the driveway, hoping they would have a girl my age, but they didn't, and they were, I knew at the time, too old to be expecting him. The back of the truck was piled with pieces of their life, plants growing out of rusty coffee cans, an old wooden trunk, and a white iron bedstead. Mostly it looked like junk. I watched for a while, then I started helping them carry their stuff into the house. Mrs. De La Rosa told me to call her Angela. She had long black hair that hung down her back in a single braid, and her brown eyes held creases at the corners. Her husband's name was Frank. and he had that pasty look that says a man has spent most of his time inside. He often mumbled a grumpy hello when she told him my name was Christina and that I was from across the street. He smelled like any dad did when he came, like my dad did when he came home late at night after bowling, stale and yeasty. I remember Frank as a man who grumped and mumbled a lot through the years, although always muttering under his breath whenever she would ask him to do something for her, like dig holes for her plants or help her put up the flag for the 4th. He never did smell any better, though. I did notice that he only drank on weekends, or when Angela went to visit her sister in Houston. He worked in the back room of a store downtown, taking orders over the phone 8 to 5. But at least he had a job, as my mother would say. Angela didn't work. She had a bad leg from an accident when she was a little girl, and she couldn't stand for very long. She'd laugh and say it didn't really matter, that they seemed to have enough to eat, and her job was to take care of Frank. Her door was always open, and I spent those last few days of summer drifting in and out of their house. Sometimes I'd water her plants, and she would buy in ice cream when the good humor man came around in his white truck. Or I'd just hang out and watch her work in the yard. She was forever trying to get something to bloom in the hard soil that passed for flower beds. Those were special times for me. I was trying to escape my house, where my parents seemed locked in some sort of eternal battle about money, booze, or my father's absence. See, my father had this habit of writing hot checks, and my mom was always yelling about the police coming to take us all away. And Mom was always yelling about the police, and he managed to stay one step ahead of the game. So Angela's yard and in cold weather, her kitchen became a haven for me. I was always there, but later I would pull away from even her, pull into myself to keep safe. When I remember Angela, I remember most of all that she loved holidays, and over the years her house was always the first to signal the next coming celebration. Not just the big ones like Easter and Christmas, but all of them. Nothing fancy. Red hearts decorated her windows in February, and in the fall orange pumpkin cutouts hung on the front door, flags in the 4th. Christmas was a special time then. She told me that she started saving baking ingredients in August, a little at a time, so that she could she could bake cookies for the neighbors. She would hand deliver them on Christmas Eve, each year wrapped in red or green paper, tied with curls of ribbon. Their house was the first to have colored Christmas lights hung around the house, outside windows in December. There was an oak in her front yard that Frank would drape leaf after connecting length of red, blue, yellow, and green glass lights around. Every branch had to be covered just so. As Angela watched from the ground, she would slowly unwind each strand, feeding the loose wire to Frank perched on the topmost rung of their wooden ladder. She told me one time that she had lights from when they were first married. She even talked Frank into installing an electric plug at the base of the tree so she could plug in more. After a while, her influence reached beyond her yard. It was Angela who went up and down our street and convinced people to string lights, if only around the front doors. Year by year, house by house, our block lit up. Even my family managed to come up with a few to drape over our door. The second Christmas they lived there, a red Santa was put on the rooftop over their front porch, and the next year 5 white plastic reindeers settled beside him. By this time, I was close to 14 and was almost a freshman in high school. I didn't hang around at Angela's house much anymore. I felt I had started to develop a couple of years before, and I felt more grown up than I guess I was. I didn't think it was fun to cut out paper hearts, and I learned how to be popular and avoid being at home much. I would wave at Angela when I left on a date and come home from school. I only saw from a distance the changing of decorations on her front door, and I never went over to watch her work in her yard. I was changing that fast. I didn't have time to stop. Sometimes I felt so guilty about not crossing the street to see her that I would come home by the alley, avoiding the front yard altogether. I think Frank must have started drinking more around this time because I would hear his old truck come in late some nights and the radio on real loud. And for some reason, he would just sit in the cab until Angela came out in her robe and nightgown to help him inside. I watched from my window as he leaned back his body into hers, holding on, and she would carry his weight. My family was going through our own rough times. My dad managed to find and lose several jobs. He just never seemed to be able to put it all together. The fighting never seemed to stop. I found more and more ways to stay gone. My mom found religion and went to work at the Baptist church down the street as a secretary. The three of us seemed to just pass in the hallway sometimes. We were like shadows against the wall. One night when there was a late frost on the ground, my dad came home to find a dark house and his clothes waiting on the front porch. He threw his suitcase through one of the front windows and kicked in the door. My mom started praying and I called the police. They came and escorted him to the drunk tank. Mom cried a lot for a few days, and then she seemed to pull herself up first by some unseen string of steel, and she went back to work. Dad stayed away for a week or so. Then he came by one day when I was at school and picked up his things. He moved to Denver and became an infrequent postcard. I never saw him much after that, but then I never saw him much before either. A few weeks after Dad left, I was sitting on the front porch feeling more than a little low when Angela came outside to her front yard. I waved my usual hello, but she didn't stay in her yard. She crossed the street. When she sat down beside me and put her arms around me, I knew how much I had missed her. She just sat there and held me for a time. When I finally pulled away, we both had to dry our eyes. She said she was sorry things were so tough for me and that she knew how hard it was, but it would get better someday. I cried some more and told her I was sorry and that I never came to see her, but she just patted my cheek and said not to worry about any of that. She said she had noticed I had a bunch of new friends and that was part of growing up. Then she said she needed to fix dinner. Did I want to come? But my boyfriend Michael was coming to take me to the movies, so I couldn't. After that, I still didn't cross the yard to visit anymore, but I didn't feel the need to come in the back door either. Spring blended into summer overnight the way it does in Texas sometimes. School let out, and I found a part-time job watching Mrs. Keller's kids in the morning. One afternoon, I was reading on the front porch, just waiting out the heat, when I noticed Angela out in her backyard hanging out her wash. I thought briefly about going over to help her. Then the phone rang. I went inside to answer it. I had been talking to my friend Marianne for a while when I heard a siren coming down our street. For some reason, there was a coldness that moved down my back. I told Marianne that I had to go. I didn't wait for her goodbye. I just dropped the phone and headed for the front of the house. Through the front door, down the 5 steps, my heavy feet carried me to the sidewalk. Across the street in front of Angela's house, the black and white police car had stopped. Its red light still revolving on the roof. Mrs. Tully, who lived next door to Angela, was running up to meet them. In the distance, through the fog of my mind, I can remember hearing another siren coming fast. I can still see Mrs. Tully's gestures as she motioned into the backyard. My legs were like jointless pieces of steel, and I don't remember the 30-foot walk to Angela's yard, but I do remember standing at the side of her house and a policeman telling me I couldn't go in the back. It seemed that Mrs. Tully had been talking to Angela over their connecting back fence when she thought her phone rang. She just turned away to listen for a sound, and when she turned back, Angela had crumpled on the ground. She died, as simple as that, holding on to the coolness of her wet sheets and the scorching heat of a July afternoon. I don't really remember about what was left of the summer. I know I went to her funeral, and just about everyone in the neighborhood came. Mr. and Mrs. Tully stood on either side of Frank to hold him up. There were lots of flowers and tears, and people kept saying how much we were going to miss her. I don't remember crying there. I cried later at home behind my closed bedroom door. I know the heat must have continued. After all, it was summer. I guess I went swimming a lot. I always did. Fall must have come. School must have started. I remember that October in the football games because I had made junior cheerleader that year. When Halloween came, Angela's house seemed darker than usual. No jack-o'-lantern greeting from her front porch. Frank didn't even stay home to hand out candy to the trick-or-treaters. The old elms and oaks seemed to lose their leaves early. Only a few of the orange mums Angela planted bloomed. And folks kept saying it was going to be a cold winter. Maybe we would get some snow. Some thought it would be lucky enough to have snow by Christmas since we were already having freezing weather and it was just the beginning of November. Thanksgiving came, my mom went over to days except to get in his old truck and drive away. I think he came home drunk every night. I remember around the 1st of December it was cold and I was up late writing an article for the school paper when I heard his truck whip into the drive. I could hear the radio playing some Christmas carol. I think it was that one about Mommy kissing Santa Claus. I pulled the curtain aside and watched as he staggered up the steps to his bare front door. When he went inside, he didn't even turn on the lights. It was about a week later that people started turning on their colored lights, except for Angela's house. I pulled out the box from under my bed that held our decorations and hung lights around our door. Each light seemed to have Angela's name on it. Those few weeks before Christmas were real busy for us. Dad called from December and wanted to come see us. He said he hadn't had a drink in months, and Mom said he could come if he stayed sober. I wasn't sure. I believed him much, but what the hell, it was Christmas. I came home late on Christmas Eve from a dance, and the neighborhood was brightly lit. Angela's house was the only one that wasn't. It didn't seem right since the neighborhood had been too dark before she came. The Kellers were having a party, and there was a lot of noise and music. I could hear the people's voices. Their laughter was carried through the air like puffs from the cottonwood trees in the spring. I stood on the porch and listened, feeling more grown up than I was. Or maybe it was a grown up, something in me expected. The air was crisp, cold, and had been all day. I could see my vapor breath float out in front of my face. There had been sleet earlier, and I thought for sure I saw some snowflakes float by. But I just stood there on the porch and tasted the night. Somewhere fires were lit and the smoky haze settled close to the ground like fog. I was about ready to go inside when I heard the familiar sound of Frank's truck. He seemed to be going pretty fast. I remember hearing the grinding sound of his shifting when he turned our corner. He pulled into his driveway, cut across the grass at a sharp angle, and ran over Angela's flower bed. The truck came to rest against the porch. He killed the motor but left the lights on as he staggered from the cab. The door hung open and I could hear carols on the radio. Frank leaned against the side of the truck and I saw his shoulders move convulsively. He put on his hands in his face and wiped at his eyes. After a while he moved up the steps and went inside, but he didn't close the front door. I remember watching his lights went on in room after room as though he was trying to light the world. Frank appeared at the door with a large box in his arm. He staggered down the steps and dropped it on the ground by the oak tree. I moved off the porch, went out by the curb to stand near a parked car. Frank never saw me. I noticed there were snowflakes in the air and there was a light dusting of them on the hood of the car. Music from the Kellers' party was faint. Frank tore into the box. He tipped it over, spilling the contents. I heard the sound of glass breaking. He rifled through the dark pile on the ground and pulled something loose. He raised his arm in a high arc and threw whatever it was he pulled loose into the tree. Then he bent low by the trunk. Suddenly, red, green, blue, and yellow kaleidoscope sneaked over and around the lowest branch of the tree. Its tail of red fell to the ground. Frank stood still and looked at the lights. Then, with a low moan, he grabbed the box and threw it against the tree. Over the sound of the glass hitting the tree, I heard his voice cry out into the night, "Merry Christmas, Angela." It was years before Christmas Eve left a feeling of sadness for me. I don't know what became of Frank. He only lived there till the spring, then he moved away. A couple of years later, my dad moved back. Mom kept working, he kept drinking, but he did stop writing hot checks. But it took moving away and college and a lot of writing of other people's lives before I could look forward to that season without remembering. Now I can remember Angela and her Christmas. And I have my own kids too. It's easier through their eyes. But every once in a while I hear Frank's voice, the way it sounded that silent night, and I still see Angela's face when I hear the lights. This poem is called Cedar Fever. Some trees have trunks straight as sticks, and the bark peels off in long, smooth pieces, exposing the white lady skin underneath. Some trees have trunks of knotted twists, crooked as hands that hold floodgates shut, and the bark is bumpy scarred like a lover's face. The tree outside my window has a trunk, neither crooked nor straight, but real to its length, and its bark pulls off in long, stringy strips that smell of cedar. The tree outside my window wears on its green a dusting of orange, powder that puffs up in the wind as if the wild woods have taken to fire. Thank you.